Hey everyone, in this video we wanted to follow up on our previous video where we talked about the importance of sodium on a whole foods diet by briefly touching on the importance of potassium and some of the nuances around how much sodium you should be eating. So for a lot of people eating a whole foods diet, they're generally going to be getting quite a bit of potassium. And for those who aren't?
Not necessarily. I think that the people I deal with are a lot different than you too. A bunch of tiny women that are used to eating like very small portion sizes of regular food, when they switch to a whole foods diet, they adopt the mentality of eating very small meals still. And so really they don't, like, I see it all the time with small women.
You know, that's a fair point. Now that we're actually talking about it, I would say that many people who follow a low carbohydrate diet that is based around whole foods would also be getting very minor amounts of potassium. And
yeah, I always add spinach into those. Like when I used to do a lot of meal plans back for fitness competitors and stuff, I would always have them eat spinach because you can eat a ton of it for low carbs, low calories, and get a lot of potassium in.
I think a low carb diet might actually be a great example diet for this discussion because there's two major points about potassium that I want to hit on.
Yeah.
And the first is that with low carb diets, based on our previous video, you have people that are going to be salting their food and adding salt into their diet, but the diet's not going to be high in potassium, even though they are eating relatively whole foods. And we don't quite know what the implications of that are. The body is very good at regulating electrolyte balance within the body, but we have data showing that higher potassium intake reduces the risk of numerous chronic diseases. And we also have data from an evolutionary perspective suggesting that our ancestors regularly ate a diet where the potassium to sodium ratio was anywhere between 3 and 10. So if you got... What?
Let's put that in real life terms.
Real life terms, yeah. It's kind of hard to get your head around when you think about like the 10-to-1 ratio. Because if you get 5 grams of sodium in your diet, which would be about 2 teaspoons of table salt, then that ratio would mean you need to get anywhere between 15 to 50 grams of potassium. Yeah, sorry, I'm hitting the table and it's jiggling. But even just 15 grams is extraordinary.
I have no issue hitting 10 grams from whole foods.
Yeah.
But I eat an appropriate amount of food, whole foods, that is. I don't have my mind set on these like tiny little portion sizes of food. So, and I know how to maximize it too.
Yeah.
Through certain foods.
Yeah, exactly. But for many people that can be incredibly difficult to do, and it's going to take a lot of practice
and time adapting to a normal size meal.
And I think this is a good opportunity right here to introduce the idea of potassium supplements, but we kind of have I think we might have slightly differing views on them.
Yep.
Maybe not differing views, but we definitely respond to them differently.
Yes.
So,
and I think a lot of people, I deal with a lot of people that have the similar lifestyle as me. We tend to not eat enough carbs because our calorie requirements are low and we like being super active. That's why I don't get enough carbs on some days. It's not because I'm avoiding them, because I'm not. I just move around a lot and try to keep my calories in check. But when I take a potassium supplement, I get heart palpitations.
Yeah.
But I can eat a ridiculous amount from food and never anything like that.
And those heart palpitations, if I'm remembering correctly,
it's from low blood sugar.
Yes,
because it causes an insulin response. The potassium does for me.
Okay.
And I don't have enough. That ties that in. Sorry, I was all over the place there.
For me, I've never noticed that happen, but I also eat a ridiculous amount of carbs
and calories.
So for me, I take like a teaspoon of potassium citrate at every meal, which is giving me about 3 grams of potassium for 1 teaspoon. And
on top of what he gets in his diet, and he eats a lot dietarily as well.
Yeah, so I get on a typical day, depending on how many vegetables I decide to eat, or if I eat my potatoes, then I'm usually getting anywhere between 12 and 20 grams of potassium on a daily basis.
I get around 10 grams.
Yeah,
so.
From Whole Foods entirely.
Yep, I'm a small woman, though, so there's the difference between us.
And this kind of feeds into one of the reasons why I supplement, despite getting around 10 grams dietarily on a good day as well, is the second issue why I think potassium is important, and one of the ways that I believe many people eating a low-carbohydrate diet are shooting themselves in the foot, and that's acid-base balance. Potassium is one of the primary buffering molecules alongside bicarbonate in the body. And when people eat a high-protein diet, like many low-carbohydrate individuals do, that contributes significantly to the acid burden on the body. And no, I'm not suggesting that it alters the pH of the blood. That's ridiculous. What I'm suggesting is that when you eat a highly acidic diet, like from high protein, your body,
bicarbonates,
it affects your buffering system. Your body will, if you don't, for example, eat more calcium to counteract it, your body will leach calcium from the bone to access the stored bicarbonate. And that helps buffer the acid load. Protein increases the absorption of calcium. So generally speaking, you see no net change in whole body calcium balance. But if you actually give people high protein diets without additional calcium, then you do see their bone mineral density decline. And when you look at studies...
That damn context.
I know, right? And when you look at studies that, in particular, I'm thinking of one study from the 1990s, or maybe it was the early 2000s. The researchers tested 21 different diets. And the only variables of these diets that they changed was how much protein and potassium they contained. And they looked at the renal acid load. And what they found is that dietary potassium accounts for 70% of the renal, or dietary potassium to protein ratio accounts for about 70% of the acid load that hits your kidneys. And so while I can't easily off the top of my head convert this into like a pragmatic number, like eat this much potassium for every gram of protein, what I can say is that it's important to eat a high potassium diet if you're eating a high protein diet.
Okay, so let's put this into practical terms now. How do you think people should start supplementing if they want to experiment with that? Because I do not believe it's best for them to start at a teaspoon, right?
Yeah.
Because they don't know what their tolerance is.
Well,
right?
First and foremost, I would want them to use food.
Yeah.
Right? I would want you to look at your diet and...
But people are going to be listening to this, and I know how people are, and they're going to be like, well, Alex does it.
Yeah. Well, okay, I do it, but I also eat I also eat 2 pounds of potatoes every day as a main carbohydrate source because they're so rich in potassium. Like, you're probably not doing that. Like, from both of us, from our diet, get 8 to 12 grams of potassium every day just from the foods we eat, from the vegetables, from the sources of carbohydrates we choose, and the fibrous vegetables we eat. That's where you need to start.
Is food first.
Food
always.
first. I probably don't even need to supplement, but I personally haven't noticed any negative side effects, number one. Number two, I eat like 350 to 400 grams of protein every day, just because I eat 4,000 calories, and the sources of carbs I get are high in protein, alongside all the animal products. And so it's precautionary. And three, so yeah, I don't notice any side effects. It's precautionary, and potassium citrate bulk powder is very cheap. So it's not like it's,
Anyways, if you want to try some, I would start at like 1/4 of a teaspoon with a meal, preferably with some carbs, because it does cause an insulin spike.
Definitely,
and you will have low
food.
blood sugar.
And that's what I do. I just eat it within my meals.
Yeah, he does it with food. Even when I do it with food, I haven't figured out like how to make enough carbs and my activity level works yet. So it doesn't work for me still.
And if you want to be anal about dosing, potassium citrate is 40% potassium by weight. So,
I used to use potassium bicarbonate when I made my own electrolyte drinks. What is your thoughts on that?
well, that would be great because
It's hard to get a hold of. I had to order it like from some chemical company.
So I have two thoughts. Well, actually, this is a great another talking point. Bicarbonate is amazing. Sodium bicarbonate's well researched in the literature to have an ergogenic effect because the bicarbonate helps buffer the acid generated during high intensity exercise. Potassium bicarbonate is adding two powerful buffers to the system.
And that was my thought process when I was using it, or when I was making my own electrolyte drinks.
Yeah. So I don't see any issue there. Potassium citrate is another great option because that's the form of potassium found in nature.
Foods, right?
Yeah, it's the natural form. You'll see like potassium chloride. That's what's used to prevent hypoalkemia or low blood potassium in medical settings. But that is not suitable for sustaining long-term potassium balance because that extra chloride molecule needs to be excreted by the kidneys. And to do that, it takes either a sodium or a potassium ion with it. So that means if you supplement potassium chloride for a long period of time, you're either not going to get as much bioavailable potassium because you'll lose more of it in your urine, or you're going to further dysregulate your sodium balance because you'll lose more sodium in your urine. Potassium citrate avoids that issue. Citrate's also a precursor to synthesizing bicarbonate. So it basically, potassium citrate's my go-to. Potassium bicarbonate's a fine substitute. But citrate's easy to get a hold of and it works and it's the natural form that you get from food.
So start with food.
Yeah.
If you want to experiment, start very, very low with a meal.
Yeah, exactly. And
but food first.
Work your way up if you choose to do so. I've never personally gone above a teaspoon at any meal because I don't see the purpose. I'm not trying to superload potassium. I'm just trying to get some extra. So yeah.
Perfect.
If you enjoyed this video, then awesome. That's what we're trying to do. And if you know anyone who you think this information would help, then please share the video with them.
Bye.